When I started my research, I had decided to take on the task of investigating where people were accessing their food and why they were accessing it in the places they did. Through my observations, I soon became hyper-aware of my privilege, something that had been invisible to me in a sea of other privileged individuals. I began to see how lucky I was and how skewed food systems and nutrition education had become in America and globally. I had no idea what it would be like to be raised in a completely different cultural world, work 2 jobs, feed several children, or live far away from places where fresh and local food was available. I came to these realizations every day as I scoured the city for informants. I saw markedly different types of people depending on where I went. I found mostly white, middle or high income and educated adults with cars at farmers markets. I found struggling low-income or homeless individuals in multiple pockets of the city center. I found a largely Hispanic population accessing the neighborhood house food pantry, and I found food vendors of all ethnicities and identities behind the scenes of many markets, restaurants, and grocery stores. Each person had a unique story to tell me. What I gathered from this research is that people tend to go where food is convenient and familiar, where they have a sense of belonging, and where they don't have to stray far from a comfortable home base. What became apparent to me was that convenience and culture were the biggest factors pertaining to the choices a person made about the food they ate. This tied in with the theories posited by Timothy Karras on native spaces and Seth Low on the social production and construction of space. For example, just as the migrants described by Karras needed a shared space and a familiar community for support, so did the pantry goers at Neighborhood House. The pantry functioned as a community space that offered both familiar faces and vital sustenance for their families. And as for the choices about foods to take home from the pantry, they all seemed to be influenced by cultural norms. As I was consistently informed by the pantry coordinator, who witnessed tortillas flying off the shelves, while oatmeal or obscure vegetables were left untouched for weeks. Factors such as these and the structure of the spaces I encountered led to specific ways in which people utilized them on a daily basis. I began to discover what certain places meant to people and how spatial and habitual uses of space contributed to how people behaved within the space. This played out at farmers markets more than it did at any other observation site I went to. During market hours, the park blocks flooded with patrons who had free time and cash to spend. I didn't find anyone using food stamps at the market. In fact, when I asked, most people told me that they never needed food stamps or didn't qualify for SNAP benefits. Most people informed me that the market was more of a fun thing to do on a Saturday morning than a time they were using to focus on providing food for their family. In contrast, many of the vendors I talked to informed me that the market was their livelihood, not a place to relax. Big farms like DeNoble were largely for profit, and small-scale vendors told me the same story. One individual, a Native American man named Simon from the Yakima tribe, described to me how he not only lived off the money he made selling his fish, but that the practice of fishing and eating salmon was something his family had done for generations. Something else I gleaned from my experience at the market were how the homeless population behaved on a weekly basis. During most days, homeless individuals occupied the space freely, sleeping, eating, and socializing there. But during market hours, they were either pushed to the periphery of the space or avoided the space at all costs, probably feeling a distinct sense of not belonging. After I had conducted my series of interviews, I came to the conclusion that receiving help from pantries or food stamps isn't going to influence people to eat more vegetables or learn how to cook homemade meals. Not unless there is a way to make it easy and delicious. I do believe the political will can be strengthened in these regards, however. It has become obvious to me that supplementing low-income family diets alone does not provide real food justice. Since the biggest obstacles I found keeping people from accessing healthy and fresh food seemed to be inconvenience and education, I would propose funneling more efforts into improving the variety of places where local produce and healthy staples can be bought. Imagine mini-marts receiving government incentives for having a produce section with food that can be bought with food stamps. Imagine nonprofits that not only glean leftover food from markets, but also teach people how to prepare it. The picture is incomplete here, I can admit that. I have more questions and ideas now than when I started. But Gell and Svar were certainly onto something when they wrote their chapter on public life studies and urban policies. The way cities are designed and the way structures are built contributes greatly to the standard of its inhabitants' living. Perhaps if food can climb higher on the political agenda, these inequalities can be mediated, at least within the Portland metro area.